Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll give folks a moment to load into the room. We had quite a few of you registered. Great topic today. We do appreciate you always making time to join us for these CII webinars presented by our members and their invited guests. We also invite you to join our next webinar. You can find that on the CII events page. That is on AI in construction. It takes place next week, November 12th at noon Central. Hope to see you there. As always, we'll have our Q&A held at the very end of our session. So if you'll use the gray control panel to enter in any questions you have, or you can also feel free to use the chat if you have questions. We'll address those at the end. And if for some reason we go over and we have too many questions, we will circle back with you via email if that's okay. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce the team here. They will each introduce themselves, and I'll kick it over now to Saram with SharpCloud, and he'll tell you a little bit more about our topic and our team. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for your time today. So today's event is strategically planning and aligning portfolios with enterprise goals. And the objective today for the next hour is the team assembled in front of you will go through some of their own user experiences and customer experiences, and we're really going to show you how we think we can help customers or the kind of the marketplace today to align the work that they do with the strategic goals that they have for their organizations and businesses. Before we dive in to set the scene and go through those use cases, I'd just like to run around and introduce the team to you. So why don't we go around the team, guys? So Bull, why don't you go first?
Hey, thanks a bunch, Saram. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Bullard. You may have noticed Saram called me Bull. People tend to do that. I'm a Customer and Industry Value Engagement Director with Oracle Construction Engineering, living in St. Louis. Before coming over to Oracle about 6 years ago, I spent 10 years with Ameren in the utility industry running a project controls team, and I also spent 10 years at Anheuser-Busch doing utilities process engineering. So really passionate about today's topic and looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists. Thanks, Saram. Jason.
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name's Jason Hire. I'm based here in the UK, London, and I'll give a bit more of introduction, but background, I'm a process control engineer, and I'm helping large organizations with their strategic portfolio management, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the stories with you later on in the presentation. Thank you.
Jack? I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Jack, also based in London, working on Saram's team as a solutions consultant, so working with clients on their data and on exactly these questions about portfolio management and strategic alignment.
Thanks, guys. Back to me. I'm Saram Khan, co-founder at SharpCloud. I used to run a company some of you may have heard of called Master. So back in the day, my co-founder at SharpCloud and I ran a schedule risk analysis company called Master. That business was acquired by Primavera Systems back in 2007. Some of you may know that software product as Oracle Project Risk Analysis. So the team here and the background for many of us is we've been around complex programs, projects, and risk management for a very long time. And I guess back in the day, if we set the scene for this event, back in 2008, we started working with customers that were really struggling to understand how do they represent their portfolio and how do they align that with the goals. And quite often back in 2008, they'd be asking us really to help them do that on their risk management sort of processes. And they really struggled to understand risk across the portfolio. And we can still see the same issues happening today. So many of today's major programs, I would say major programs actually do know how to do their projects well, but they still really struggle in selecting the right programs and projects to do that are aligned to goals. They struggle in many cases with prioritization. And I would also say they sort of struggle with contractor management and risk management. So there are lots of complex lenses that we really see at a portfolio level that organizations are thinking, how do we get on top of these these use cases. Cool.
Yeah, and the way those challenges are articulated, and some of the things that led me down the path I got on with capital planning, portfolio management, really these 6 items here are what we hear all the time. So people want better predictability of outcomes. So it's not just being able to manage expectations of your investors and your leaders, but for the individual contributors out there, it gives them more credibility and more earning potential. Synchronizing schedules and resources across an asset lifecycle. You know, we're not really talking about project execution as much here, but it becomes a big deal having those schedules and having resources tied in. So as you're doing planning, you know how many people you have to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Third one here is one of the biggest we hear: standardizing, prioritization, and selection. The quintessential way we hear this described often is whoever yells the loudest gets the most money, and we're trying to fix that. A couple more here: manage and oversee schedule and risk with everyone in participation, and receive real-time actionable insights. Really, guys, the name of the game nowadays is collaboration and inclusion. People need to be part of the information flow so they can be part of the decision. And what that'll lead to, and what I'm going to speak to in a minute, is more organizational transparency and collaboration across teams. That leads to better culture and in the end, better results. Sarah?
Thanks, Paul. And just really to reiterate some of the points Paul has made there, we see this all the time. We really feel that visualizing complex portfolios and actually looking at the portfolio as a whole is paramount in understanding these complex lenses. And I guess where we feel we help organizations really to do the right projects is when we have a specific challenge that they are looking at around their portfolio. And there's some questions here that I was kind of talking to the team and saying, if we look at our major customers, what are the challenges that they come forward with? And often those challenges are things like, can I better understand enterprise risks, internal contractors and suppliers? Do we understand the landscapes for these things when we're talking about contractor bundling or supply chain? These are super complex environments that many of our organizations and many owners are working in now. Secondly, are we actually doing the right projects to maximize our strategic goals? Sometimes what we've seen with organizations is they've kind of got a backlog of work that they're delivering, but actually over a period of time, the strategy has changed and really just iterated to a different place. But they're still actually delivering on some programs and capital projects that maybe aren't giving them the benefits that they originally thought they were going to give them. And this is, again, a very important point we see. Thirdly, we get a lot of leadership to really, this is back to Paul's point on collaboration. We're seeing a lot of leadership saying, look, our market is changing much quicker. We don't have the opportunity to maybe rethink strategy annually. So we want to react in an agile way to our market moving. And that comes back to how do we collaborate better? How do we work across these complex silos? A couple of other questions here that we see: are we investing in the right innovations aligned to future strategic themes? This is happening more and more with organizations now, where often we'll see there'll be like a horizon scanning team that will sometimes now be leading a lot of the thinking around the future portfolios. And in order for them to understand what new technologies need to be added to the portfolio, they first really need to understand the current portfolio and the white spaces that they have in their business. And again, we have some examples of how Sharp Cloud and what we've done with our customers and how we can kind of address that question. And then maybe lastly, maybe I would say most importantly for some of our customer organizations, is running what-if scenarios. This is, I think, super important now as we're going into a world where lots of organizations are looking at almost parallel businesses, and how could we have parallel maybe business plans, and what is the difference between them, and what would it take to get there? And I think that kind of analysis at a portfolio level is super complex, and it's again something we can talk to today. Back to you, Bull.
Thank you, Sarah. Now it shouldn't be a surprise that I'm going to talk about CII. This is a CII webinar. If you know me, you know I love me some CII. So, The other thing I'm infamous for saying, and Saram said it a couple of times, he talked about doing the right projects. So, I tend to look at project delivery as doing the right projects and doing the projects right. Try to make it as simple as possible. And for 40 years, CII did a wonderful job. It continues to do a wonderful job of helping us do projects right. And I was honored to be part of Research Team 394, along with Carlos Caldas, who led the effort to actually look at the other side of project delivery. CII started on this path years ago, and then we had an official research team. But when you look at this slide, this is so important because technology is important to everyone on this panel. Process is a big deal, but what I want everybody to be thinking about today is people. Okay, and it's people getting along, people respecting one another, people having faith in one another, and people feeling empowered and like they're part of the decision. So what we did with RT 394, and we have some great deliverables. I'd encourage you to look it up. If you're not a CII member, talk to Jenny Bien, and you're going to want to see this. But our whole intent was to get the business organizations and project organizations talking better, okay, working together more closely, so that as the project organization went out and was doing their best to execute projects on time, on budget, they would know that the projects they're doing are aligned with the vision, mission, and goals of the company. So I just want you to keep this in mind as we go through today. Just think about some of those rifts, some of those conflicts where business folks, maybe it's controllers, corporate planning, FP&A, all this frustration, and what we're getting to today can help you alleviate some of that. Sarah?
Thanks, Paul. We're going to hand over now to Jason and Jack to really think about some of the points we've made and put them in perspective with some customer examples that they've worked on. So Jason, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So a little bit about myself. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here. So my background, as I said, is that I'm a process control engineer, and could you go to, yeah, thanks. And my background really started in power generation, and I moved into the life sciences, and in doing so I got involved in capital delivery projects, both in R&D and manufacturing. And to Bull's point, that's where I started to really understand about the people aspect and the teams of working together. Later on, then I moved over to Lend-Lease, Bovis Lend-Lease, and I was working in the US, in Princeton, as well as running operations around in Europe and Ireland and the UK. And that was really around our life sciences division, doing master planning, engineering, construction, commissioning, handover, and IT automation projects. And then later on, I founded Rialto, which I'm going to share some of the stories, which was really focused around about collaboration and data visualization, and specifically, as Bull has just mentioned, how we connect both our business strategies and plans to the project delivery, program delivery. Because as I walked around and was doing this, I noticed when I was traveling from country to country, I could be on a similar type of construction project, whether it was in Spain, UK, or in Pennsylvania, and we were getting different outcomes. And I often wondered, what was the key difference? And one of the two things I'm going to share with you is one was about the people, the collaboration and team, and one was about the data. So the talk today is going to be really around about connecting those dots, getting sufficient alignment. People talk about alignment all the time. We only need to get sufficient alignment. Trying to get total alignment is just doesn't happen. Things keep moving and changing so much. But also is really to get that integration with the organization, people, processes, and the data, and I do it in that order. So it's really important that we think about that, and the consequences of doing that are all the things that Saram and Bull have just talked about, and as a result, we end up wasting money. So where are we now? We are perhaps I think unable to see and understand our business priorities. I find a lot of the time people are not quite sure why they're doing or what they're doing or what impact it has to their business. And as importantly, in the contracting business that I was in, was making sure we were delivering the client's objectives as well. And I'll go on, I'll show a little bit of that example later on. Possibly we've got siloed people and data, and the consequence of that is the misunderstanding, and that definitely happens. You know, I thought you said this and you meant that, and they're two totally different things. Whereas I found a picture paints 1,000 words and helps to get that clarity and build up the trust. And maybe there's just too much complexity out there. We're very much of a reduction thinking where we try to reduce. And as we all know in capital delivery, it's very complex, just the supply chain itself and how it connects, and especially we're running multiple projects at the same time. It becomes very difficult when you're working at a strategic portfolio level to really make those decisions with confidence if you don't have that visibility. And probably, you know, I would suggest that the business and project delivery network are not fully connected or totally disconnected, as I found in some cases. So being able to bridge that gap is really important. So if we move on to the next slide there. So obviously, where do we want to be? Well, for me, just imagine if everyone knew and understood that. I've been on construction sites where at the end of the day, you know, you end up in the porter cabins or on the site offices, and you've got a big plan out in front of everybody, so everybody knows and understands. The issue with that, it's not data driven, it's paper based, you're writing over it, post-it notes. So just imagine if we can see all of that key information at the right place at the right time. Visualize where relevant people and data are connected. And I use the word relevant. There's many a time when we've been working on these types of projects that you have so many people involved and so much data involved, it all becomes noise. And that really inhibits any increased agility. And it also really prevents that enhanced collaboration. So from an agile perspective, empower, work in small teams is absolutely where we need to be. And just imagine and envisage where you can actually interact with your data interactively. And this is really important. One project I was doing, and it's going to be one of the, I think the second case study I'm just going to share with you, the fact that we got engineers interactively moving on screens the data and seeing the result in a prioritization, it was around safety, was very collaborative, but more importantly, it came to a joint co-created decision. And that was really powerful when we were doing that. And then lastly, just picture a situation where we're actually getting all the relevant data being automatically fed through. And I'll share a little bit about that, of how we've done that. Obviously, data integration is a big kind of drive for everybody at the moment. So yeah, if you just move on to the next one. So the first bit, I'm just going to go back to 2003. So 2003, I'm in the UK. We're working with some major pharmaceutical companies. What was really important about this is, and it's to Bull's point, we were in a partnership, a joint. There were 6 kind of engineering companies all working with this company. And basically they gave us a phone call and say, guys, we need a warehouse down in Africa at one of our sites, and we need it in 8 months' time. And the reason why they needed that, they sent through the photographs. There was all product and work in progress product in corridors, in porter cabins, temporary storage. It was just, you know, totally, I wouldn't say totally out of control, but it wasn't right. It needed to be sorted. So the solution was, we're going to build a warehouse and we're going to build it in 8 months. So we were starting thinking about offsite construction, doing prefabrication, getting the foundations, until one of my colleagues just happened to say, you know, why has this happened? What's the root cause? And because we had worked with them and because we had done some other master planning, we actually could compare their facilities as well as some other facilities and just say, well, hang on a moment, they're manufacturing these, I think it was around about 4 billion units per annum. The inventory and warehousing that these people have got is similar to what you've got, but they don't need all of that. So we collated that data and analyzed it, and we did it by spreadsheets, because there was nothing like Sharp Cloud around or any other tools like Power BI, etc. And what we found was two things. One, there was a disconnect between corporate and the local delivery. And secondly, the information that they were using was always out of date. And as a result, they were over manufacturing. So the sales orders coming through were more than what it should be. The inventory turnovers were incorrect. There was poor collaboration between the organizations. And once we kind of modeled that for them, we actually came back 2 weeks later and said, actually, stop the project. And this was I think this was around 53 million pounds it was going to cost to do that. And we actually said, this is what you need to go and do. So we stopped the project. It was great, saved all that capital expenditure. But that's the point where I suddenly, kind of like those moments, I kind of knew that there was this disconnect between people and data. And it's actually, how do we solve that problem? So if we then just go to the next slide and just move on there to the next one, it was really, how could we connect and align people and the data in a visual collaborative way? And there was 2 points that really I came to. One probably comes from my process engineering background of data visualization, but how could we put that into a business context? And secondly was the word collaboration at this time, 2003, was just coming out. Now it's used everywhere. But it was really, how could we get the teams to work together to get this alignment? So if we go on to the next bit, in that time period, there's 2 things that really came to my mind. One was this, the model that you can see at the top left there is that's the corporate strategy. I'm not going to go through it, but you can see corporate strategy into business, and we're delivering. So that's happening at a high level. And then down below, we've got ourselves delivering the projects, the programs, and the portfolios. But there was this strategic delivery integration gap in between. And what I've really come up with is, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I really do suggest that you delve into it, and I'd be more than happy to share more information about it, is to look at strategic portfolio management. This has now really become more of a business process, if you will, of really taking what we know as our project portfolio management and integrating that into the strategy. And it acts as that strategic integration gap that you've got there, where on the left-hand side, we've got our projects and programs with all the kind of activities that we have. And on the right-hand side here, we have our strategic portfolio. And it's actually filling that gap. And that gap, as I've gone forward, has been filled by 2 points. One, as I said, is the collaboration. What have I used on that is the ISO 44001 framework. Again, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that actually stemmed out of from the construction industry. As we know, some of it can be quite transactional, quite adversarial, and that framework was co-developed by numerous organizations that really came with this framework. And secondly, that's where I really started to come across Sarum and Sharp Cloud at that time, whereby I could see that we could take key relevant data and actually align it to these strategic goals. So that was the aha moment. And if we go on just to the next slide, one of the ways that we do that, and I'm just going to try and take over, if I may, just on the sharing here, if I may, Sarah, I'm just going to do that. To do that and show my screen, I'm just going to talk about one bit here. Is we looked at using roadmaps. So can you see my screen okay, gents? Can you see roadmaps in there? So you get this collaboration going on, and when you're in that collaboration, you're looking at different people. So we know at a strategic kind of business level, there's a commercial strategic perspectives. And when we're delivering, we've got the design, development, production, or the building, and then we've got this research innovation work going on. This one is from one I did in 2009, so it stood the test of time. It was from a pharmaceutical company. And what this is showing you how you can translate that into roadmaps. But the point is here, we can join things together. So we're able to see from a project science, technology innovation to delivery, how it aligns the products up into the business and market. Now, our terms, we can make that to the construction delivery, and this can be the supply chain. But just showing that connectivity from one to the other is really powerful. And that is something in kind of the data tools that we were using at the time really difficult to do. Again, it helps you to ask these key questions. I'm not going to go through it this time because we don't have enough, but I think the 3 questions would always be, where do we want to go? So in your project delivery or in our business, from a strategic perspective, where do we want to be and where are we now? And then thirdly, how do we get there to fill those gaps? So if I take you back to the PowerPoint slide here that we were at, and I just go back to here, we just looked at that. So the next project I want to share with you, with that kind of aha moment and learning, in 2015, I was at a conference, and funny enough, it was showing interactive boards, how you can take data. So I was doing a lot with BIM, 3D, 4D, and we were getting onto 5D, things like that. And that's just where kind of, in this instance, SharpCloud was there as well. And the client that was there was a major train operator in the UK here, running multi-billion capital projects. Long story short, we got involved, and I got involved with it. And the problem is that they had this reporting of 232 data points on a spreadsheet. When I went there were 61 spreadsheets. So there was 61 projects. It actually rolled up in the end. I think it got to 99. But what was happening was that people were trying to review these projects, and it was taking thereabouts 2 to 3 days of 14 to 22 people every 4 weeks, because they worked in periods, to understand where the projects and the programs they associated to working successfully, and more importantly, was it aligned to the client and to their strategic objectives. So what we ended up doing was taking that data, and in this instance, using the SharpCloud platform that Jack will show you a little bit in a moment. And actually, we created these programs and integrated the data so that you could build it up from a project that rolled up into a program that then aligned to the strategic objectives and to the client's priorities, of which there were several clients. We also use the interactive touchscreens that I mentioned at the very beginning. The data integration, that was taking data from SAP. It wasn't a full integration at that time in 2015. We were taking Excel reports, and then we had this automation that was going around and uploading the data. We were also taking P6 milestones, and we were rolling that up into it. Risk registers that the guys and girls were filling out on site, they were being read, as well as the EH reporting. And that all got consolidated into these roadmaps, little mini roadmaps that then aggregated. What was the outcome? In the first portfolio review that they did with the sponsors, they identified a £5 million saving. How did that come about? That came about because the client was looking at their priorities, so we aligned to that, and I'll show you that in a moment, how that worked. And they could say to the operator, say, why are you doing that project? It was a canopy project, and it was just over £5 million was going to do that. And they said, well, you know, that's on the roadmap. No, that's changed. We're going to knock that down in 2 years' time, and we're going to redevelop all in that area. So you don't need to go and fix all of that. At which point they said, brilliant, because we didn't know about that. So that was the first thing. And then secondly, the delivery of that allowed other work that came through to be actually reallocated. So they reallocated the money and the resources over onto that project. The other outcome from that was management by exception. So you hear where I'm talking about all of this taking 3 days with all these people. In the end, because we had a very simple grid, anything that was in the top right-hand corner, red, then that's what they focused on. And to Bill's point again about the collaboration people, I had to re-coach the program director on this, because it wasn't a tool to go and bash people up. Why is your project red? Why is it laid over? It was a tool to be more proactive. It was actually to give insight, to say, I think this is going, I have a problem here, and to get to leadership to come down and offer help. And that for a lot of people was a major behavioral change, but for the people who are running the projects, it was for them, one, he said, this is a game changer. You know, I feel a lot more confident, and the way that working, that I'm aligned, but more importantly, we're getting the help that we weren't really getting before. So that was the first one. So if I move on to what it kind of looked like, that was the kind of governance. Again, I'm not going to go into, but that's where the customer was. This was the operations and delivery, and that was a joint venture, by the way. There was a main contractor, but there were two other major suppliers on a partnership deal working, and this was the business that I was working for. So it was actually, how did we get all of that alignment? And what we did is we created in this is kind of one of the front dashboards whereby we had the project portfolios working, and you can see there, those are the key aspects that were getting aggregated and displayed. And then we would go from a program manager who would then review that data by exception and say, yeah, that looks good. And then it would actually go up to the sponsors. And all of that was real time. It was updating every day, every 24 hours, and anyone could go onto that online and see where they was at that particular time. There was also the other bit from a collaboration perspective of commenting and feedback. So if a sponsor was looking at that saying, yeah, this doesn't look quite right, or what are we doing about that particular risk that I've seen in my portfolio, how are we addressing, or do you need any help for that? And I think one of the important things on this one as well, there was a glass facade contractor. And although when we looked at the project, it was green, it actually had an early warning notice on it. The reason why that happened is because the people who were working in a team had heard that the contractor was probably going to go out of business. So an early warning notice was placed on that, and we knew about that risk before it actually materialized, and were able to mitigate it. I don't know what the value of the cost was, but I do know it saved several months of delay on that project. What did that look like? If I just go into this view a little bit over here, that prioritization where we saved the 5 million, these were like kind of all the projects. And by using a tool like SharpCloud that we were starting to use in here, we can actually see the golden threads. So you notice over the top here, so if I just click it back again, we have this thing that is called Project Authority, money that we're allowed to spend. And when you're doing that, you can actually start to see its filtering. But when I show it in view, for example, like so, I can now see that this client priority we're addressing through these projects, and importantly, it aligns to our objectives as well. So being able to fill in that strategic program delivery disconnect, here's an example of this of working, and that's how we saw the actual 5 million that we got saved. Obviously, I've had to redact this. This is just the framework, and I've just put simple information into it. So going back to the presentation here, the next one that I would like to share with you is more up now into 2022. So what's now happened is that I've seen businesses that are adopting collaboration in a much more strategic way. So for example, one client, which is petrochemical, what we came up with is collaborative contracting. And in this organization, which was a UK engineering company, they too heard about what we'd done. I shared with them about that. They actually went on to do the ISO 44001 accreditation. But what we ended up doing is, again, they had the same challenge. Data being stored in multiple locations, in multiple organizations on spreadsheets, delivering a 3.5 billion program. The bit about this was from a UK government, the program, and one of the big things they needed to do was to deliver value through savings, and that was the benefit. So how could they do that, and how could they get the teams to be working together to actually look for those opportunities of a win-win going through that? So you can see the collaborative contracting, the behaviors is really important, but being able to have a tool that brings that together so we're all on the same page. And key to this, everyone, is really the metadata of actually having apples for apples. So instead of having apples, bananas, oranges, and grapes, we're all looking at the same data. It all means the same to us, and that is absolutely key. So the solution that we came up with, it was a project portfolio management solution. Again, we had multiple programs with projects aggregating up, and I think it was 4 levels of aggregation. And we also utilized the existing data and dashboards that they had. So they were using Power BI. A lot of work had gone into that. And remember at the beginning, I said you need to really focus on the key relevant data. This is a prime example. By actually having the Power BI dashboard, we could look at the key data and say, hey, there's a discrepancy on the budgeting here, or there's going to be a delay. Okay, let's click down into Power BI in one particular instance, and we can see all the transactions. Some of these could be thousands of rows long of all the information. That is something that we don't want at a strategic level, but it allows you to go down into deep information to understand that. So when you're thinking about your strategic portfolio and how you align that, those are the kinds of connections that you need to think about, because what this kind of tool does for you, it guides the discussion. It says there's something wrong here, let's talk about it, but let's understand more of the data behind it if we need to. So I really strongly recommend that when you're looking at things like this, is that you get a standard kind of data template. Again, in one of the petrochemical companies I talk about, we actually talked about procuring data, and that's something within BIM. I'm sure for people involved with that, you'll have heard that phrase before, but procuring the data and making sure that that's aligned before you even place the contract really helps it when you're working in a complex supply chain management system. What was the outcomes and learnings? Well, the outcome was that we ended up getting a single location. So everybody in wherever parts of the country were could access it by anyone, and it was real time. When I talk to real time, being a process control engineer, this was what I would call near to real time. There were some bits being updated every hour, but mostly it was every day. What we did save was £750,000. And that was over a 3-year period. That's just one line item. Where did that saving come from? Really simply, not having to do spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. They were astounded once we'd worked out how much time was being spent on that. But more importantly was the errors, the transformation of data, etc., not being kept up to date, and people making the wrong decisions. So again, that was something that was really important, was the alignment of client objectives and priorities. So in this case, they had 7 strategic objectives and the supplier had 7 priorities. And we were nailing all of those priorities, but aligned to the company's objectives as well. So that's where you were getting the corporate strategy being aligned to also the company's, the supplier's priorities as well. As I said, one of the learnings as well was to use the correct tool for level of data granularity. So moving on to the next slide. If I could just come and share with you on my journey, and that's a very quick roll through about 25 years of it. I think really data visualization is absolutely key. I think a lot of us would appreciate that. Picture paints 1,000 words. But let the data in context help you share your story, and I've used that phrase before, but guide the discussion. Okay, I think the collaboration aspect of it is really important. Starting with the why. Again, today I was with a customer on a major engineering. We're running multiple programs of work, and as I was going through it, asking the questions, you were helping to really hone down on what kind of view and how the users would interact with, who the stakeholders were. So, and these are questions that they could not answer at this particular stage. And as we worked through it, we were able to uncover those insights. I've talked about standardized data. That's really important again from a collaboration perspective, because if you don't trust, if the data is incorrect, you don't trust it, you don't trust the tool, and people revert back to what they were doing before, and that really destroys the whole thing that you're trying to achieve. Making it interactive, I've talked about it. I've got one big pharmaceutical company that this year we were looking at it, and they were all senior leadership. It was all about prioritization. There were 663 rows in a spreadsheet of all these initiatives and prioritized priorities. They do this kind of thing in the middle of the year planning for next year. This was getting 33 executives to look through a spreadsheet. It doesn't happen, and it takes about 3 months to eventually get it done. In one afternoon, together online, using the tool that we put together in SharpCloud, the view that we're using here, they were able to prioritize the initiatives. And the bit that was for it is they were able to drag and drop up and down the grid and see the numbers change in real time. And that's when the CIO turned around and said, we can't do that. That was the game changer for them. They were, for the first time, they could see how the strategic priorities of their regions and their businesses were connected to all these IT projects and programs, of which was a couple of billion running. So once you get that interaction happening, that collaboration, it really helps to drive the performance, and people now feel a lot more confident, and that really helps them to understand the views and gets that connection, those golden threads that I showed you just previously, of to show how everything is lining up to your programs, projects, people, and to the priorities and the strategic objectives. All I'll say about collaboration is it's not just a buzzword. And you do need to take an integrated approach. I kind of divide this into 3 parts: the physical collaboration, which is the people aspects of it, but you really do need to focus around the data collaboration and how that works together. Big challenge for us, especially in the when we're in supply chain, is how do we get all that different bits of data together? And I'm happy to share with you maybe afterwards in question and answers how we go about doing that. And then it's really bringing that together. How do you use the digital technology to really support your hybrid working and putting this technology to work? And you really need to consider that in that integrated approach. So those are the kind of quick whirlwind of what I'm doing. Hopefully you found some insight or some nuggets into that, and I'll now hand back over to Jack, who is going to show us a little demonstration, I understand, on how this is going to happen. So over to you, Jack.
Great, I'll just take control of this screen. I think Jason, you maybe need to stop.
I'm just handing it over to you, so you should now have control. Yep, you've got control.
Great. Can you guys see the story?
Yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, as Jason mentioned, I'm just going to talk through one example of ways that you can think about portfolio management using this kind of fictional scenario where we're imagining that we've got a transmission tower project in an energy grid, and we're trying to decide whether we want to introduce that to our portfolio or not. And we're going to look at a variety of different considerations that would raise. So we'll be thinking about contractors and whether we can actually physically construct a transmission tower in a reasonable amount of time. We'll also be thinking about how it fits into our timeline and interacts with any dependent projects and also any milestones that we're working on. And then some other axes of this that we'll be considering will be how it affects our net zero goals and also questions of affordability. And I'll just give a quick kind of introduction to what we're doing here and also what's happening on screen. So you can see each of these boxes that we have present here are functioning essentially as very similar to rows of data in Excel. So you can see each of the different projects has been organized in this way, and then they're organized along different attributes that work in a very similar way to columns in Excel. And this is the project that we're going to be focusing on, the transmission project that we have here. And it's connected to these 4 key goals that we're going to be looking at in each of the different sections that we move through. So they're essentially rephrasing some of the key questions I was talking about in the previous navigation, just to organize them specifically as goals. So thinking about how can we bundle contracts so that we can get the same amount of work or more work done for less money? How can we modernize our grid overall so that it is producing things like lower emissions and also a more affordable product? So I'm going to move through each of those in turn. And the first section is going to be looking at this question of contracting. So we've got all of our projects organized in a particular way, and they're also connecting into these sets of contractors. And what we want to know about the transmission project specifically is whether we're going to actually have contractors available to work on it. So if I take this transmission project and just highlight its relationships to contractors, I can see that it is connected to this first contractor, AVR, which has a red border. And what that's indicating is that there's a risk at present that that contractor is over leveraged. So if I just focus on all of the relationships that this contractor has, you can see that over 50% of the portfolio are relying on this AVR contractor. So while that's probably good insofar as we can get economies of scale from working with this contractor consistently, there's also a risk that the quality of work might start to go down. They might be being overused and you might be getting worse teams assigned to our projects. So if we jump back to the transmission project, it's very helpful to know that we have this other contractor, Freer, that is working in the same space, is available to work on the project, and has this green border indicating that it doesn't have any issues of being over leveraged. So if we're worried about assigning this project to that ABR contractor, we have this backup contractor that we would have the capacity to pivot to. So from our overall question of whether you want to give this project the go ahead, that's a kind of reassuring piece of data to be aware that we do have this possibility. While I'm in this section on contractors, I just want to indicate some kind of evergreen strategy thinking that you might do using the same kind of organization. So you might want to focus in on one specific work type. Maybe we'll say asset replacement in the West, given that we have a lot of projects there. We might want to start thinking about where we can bundle our contracts. So we can see that many of the contractors are working across lots of different projects. But if I take this contractor, it's already working on one project in this space, in this area, and it might not be the best strategy to use them, because we could potentially bundle this project into Freer or Smart Solutions or one of the other contractors that we already have pre-existing agreements with. So one of the ways that you might think about that would be sort of organizing in this way, seeing what the relationships look like, and actually digging into them and thinking about them a bit more. So presenting it in this way and kind of thinking about it in that fashion is just opening that space to be able to consider the different ways that we could do things. The next thing that I'm going to jump into then is this question of the timeline and how we can overall produce a realistic plan for modernizing the grid. So you can see that we've got this transmission project organized on the time when we aim to start construction on it, which is halfway through 2025. We've also got various other projects, and what these relationship lines are indicating here is where projects are dependent on the transmission project. So certain projects will require the transmission tower to exist to be able to come into being. And where we've got a green relationship, that's quite simply indicating that the timelines line up. So the transmission project will already exist by the time we move to start working on the later project. But where we've got these red arrows, what that's indicating is that the sequencing doesn't actually make sense. So for instance, this grid transformer replacement is starting much earlier than the transmission project, even though actually we would want it to start a bit later than the transmission project because we'll need the transmission project to be in existence. So on this view here, what we can do is start to organize our timeline a bit more to get towards a sensible plan of how we would actually bring things together. And I'll just highlight what these milestones are telling us, which is two pieces of information. The first is the authorized to build date that we've applied for, and the second is whether or not we've received approval. So the date that they're highlighting is the authorization point that we've applied for, and the status color, whether it's red or green or amber, is telling us whether we've actually received that authorization. So for instance, this project can't start any earlier than Q3 2025, but we also don't yet have authorization for that. So it may have to be pushed later down the chain if that authorization comes back and we actually aren't available to start work at that point. So what we're doing here essentially is just bringing these multiple different axes of consideration together so that you can start to think in quite a serious way about how the sequencing would work. And how you do that is going to contribute towards answering that question of whether or not actually it's worthwhile introducing the transmission project. Because as we can see, a lot of projects rely on the existence of that transmission project. But if those projects are going to be overall unworkable, or if the timeline just isn't going to make sense, we might want to go back to the drawing board and think about some other ways that we could plan out this portfolio. And while I'm looking at these timelines, we can also consider how that would affect things like resourcing. So the previous view was just looking at the different ways that we can organize the timeline. But here we can also see at the same time how that's affecting different considerations of the resources that we'll actually need available. So while we might have a timeline that's ideal in terms of the sequencing and everything happening when it's supposed to happen, it might not actually be feasible to do that because we're going to reach a point, for instance, here in March 2026, where we're relying on far too much masonry and much more than we actually have available. So again, the point of showing this is to show how you can start to bring those conversations to the forefront and actually think about how you want to carry out that type of sequencing in a realistic way. In terms of responding then to those final goals that we raised in the initial view, the next thing we're going to look at just very briefly is this net zero roadmap. So again, you're seeing that same road mapping. This time we're understanding along this graph here how that's impacting our overall emissions. And As you can see, there's a sharp decline in emissions after a certain point, and the reason for that is because all of the work that we're doing here is modernizing the grid and making it much more energy efficient. But of course, in the short run, that is going to produce quite a lot of emissions because there'll be a lot of construction, a lot of heavy goods that are going to produce a lot of emissions. So what this view is letting us do is just let us think about how the long term and the short term interact. So definitely in the long term, this is meeting our targets for bringing net zero emissions down. In the short term, though, there are certain years where we might run the risk of either going over our internal benchmarks for the amount of emissions we want to allow in a year, or possibly regulations that aren't organized in a long-term fashion and instead are focused in the short run. So for instance, 2026 and 2027 here are danger years where we're possibly going to want to reorganize some of our projects to try and bring those emissions down. And you can see I'm kind of gaming it out here just for the example, but if you were using this in a workshopping capacity, you could start to be much more determined and decisive about how you were doing that type of organization. But the point is, again, bringing these multiple different axes together at once, visualizing them, and then letting that conversation take place. And so the final thing that I'm going to show you here then is just lastly this question on affordability. And I've just presented some of the questions around the impact on unit price that we're seeing all of these projects in our portfolio sized by how much impact they're actually going to have on unit price at the end of the day. And so things that are asset replacements are having a very large impact because they're fundamentally revitalizing the way that the grid works and essentially changing the product that's being offered. But things like refurbishment down here that are much smaller, they're not going to have much of an impact on unit price, even if they might be very high value projects that we're spending a lot of money on, because fundamentally they're just replacing things that already exist. And I've organized this along an axis with this NARM risk level. That's just a very common risk rating that's used in energy spaces. And so just to get back to our question of whether we want to go ahead with the transmission project, there's a lot of good information on this view that's telling us that it will have quite a large impact on unit price, but it's also very low risk. So in terms of thinking about those considerations, this is a very positive project to proceed with. So that brings me then just to this final summary. So we can see what our portfolio looks like without the transmission project and with the transmission project. And we can say that ultimately adding that transmission project modernizes our grid to quite a degree. It helps us with the progress towards carbon neutrality, though we still have to think about some points along the timeline. It definitely increases our total revenue and our affordability, and it reduces our contractor spend, or certainly doesn't increase our contractor spend in any kind of worrying fashion. So that leads us to this final decision where we decide to proceed with the tower. And I'll click through here, and that will just bring me back out to Unifier, where I might want to input a go ahead or interact with the project. But the key takeaway is the fact that we've massively improved the portfolio. We can see here on all our goals where we've assigned a score to them, the tower is massively increasing those scores. And all of those conversations that we've had will help us as well to just consider overall how we want the portfolio to work and further changes that we might want to make down the line. So that's just a quick example that I've taken you guys through. I'll pass back to Sarum and Bull to close out the talk in general, and also to kind of facilitate any questions on that.
Thanks, Jason and Jack. Really appreciate those demos, and really, Jason, going through those customer, well, your experience really over 20 years. I think it's been fascinating, even when we were talking about it yesterday. So I've got am I sharing my screen? Is that working? Let's just.
I can see contacts.
Okay. I mean, we should do some Q&A. We've got a few minutes. There's still quite a few people online. Does anybody in the audience have? Oh, I can see a question from Lewis.
I see one question here. It's the demo from Real Data.
Well, Jason, maybe you could take that. Your demo was Real Data, correct?
Yeah. So all I did is I redacted. So the information that's in it is real. It was, it's a bit out of date now because I've taken a copy of it. But yes, that was real data. And when we were doing that, as I said, we were getting data from the financial systems, the risk registers, environmental health and safety registers, and also from Primavera, but not everything. That's a real key point for that. In Primavera, all we were interested in was the milestone dates. That was it. For all the start and stops, etc., for all the work breakdown and the work packages, that's in Primavera. that's where it sits. That's, we're very clear about that. So it's just bringing up those key bits of data. So yeah, the one I showed you had real data in there.
I think just maybe I'll take the question, Jack. So the demo or the presentation that Jack did, that is really a demonstration that we built with our colleagues at Oracle for their lab environment, just really to kind of show the art of the possible between the products and how we can solve some of these problems for customers. But it is based on real life experience, and we have plenty of real life data if people wanted to see that in more detail.
Yeah, I think always the problem is sharing the solutions. I think a lot of it, as you can imagine, is highly confidential because we're exposing all these strategic initiatives and also the data that goes alongside with it, good, bad, or ugly, as the case may be. So
is there a question from Lewis about Oracle integration? I think I can see a question here. How is the integration with Oracle? I mean, we're an Oracle partner. We know Oracle really well. So the integration that Jack was showing with Unifier and P6 all native. Sharp Cloud can also be installed on the Oracle Cloud. I mean, we are very comfortable in the Oracle environment. So if you're running the Oracle toolset, absolutely, Sharp Cloud will work really cleanly with those tools. And I would say most of our customers are using, certainly for scheduling, some of the Oracle toolsets. So P6 is basically the kind of prevalent tool that we see. Sometimes there are other places we might get other information for the stories. So there might be some other financial management tools. But I would say predominantly we're seeing a lot of Oracle tools in the customers we work with. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing all the questions, Jenny, so maybe.
I see one just came in. It said Sharp Cloud substitutions or Oracle portfolio management. That might have been in relation to the comment you were just making about the integration with Oracle.
Oh, is it saying is Sharp Cloud a substitution for Oracle portfolio management? Question mark. I think, is that what it's saying?
Oh, perhaps that's it. There was a bit of a typo there.
Yeah, typing. Yeah.
Yeah. I can take that one. I mean, obviously we work really closely with Oracle and their customers, and there are lots of good tools, right? There's lots of great BI tools. There's lots of brilliant scheduling tools, and Oracle has its own portfolio tools for the sort of program level, and I think those are actually really good tools when you've got all the data together to do that work. So we can see that there is actually some really cool stuff in OPC that I've just seen in the last few weeks, and and customers who have got those sorts of portfolios just sat in OPC, I think that's a brilliant place to do that portfolio analysis. Really, where Sharp Cloud works is when we're at this strategic portfolio level, and quite often what that entails is, with some of our customers, there might be more than one instance of Oracle tools. So we have a customer with 6 different instances of Primavera P6. They also have some HCM products. They've got a finance product. They've got an Oracle ERP product. And that's where Sharp Cloud plays really well. They've got a couple of different Unifier instances as well, because we can then really consolidate data from all their Oracle data sets, plus some data that they might need from outside of that, to really get a view of that strategic portfolio. Generally, I would say the only tools we're really competing with are spreadsheets and slide decks. That is usually what we're seeing at that sort of strategic portfolio level.
Yeah, Sarah, I would say it's extremely complementary. That we have our core competencies, and I would say, without getting too commercial here, on the Oracle side, we do a lot with resources, evaluation, stuff for that audience and that group of personas. What really excites me about Sharp Cloud is exactly what you just said, and that's the ability to see relationships among data elements from so many different perspectives so quickly, and that's gonna appeal more to the leadership over the business teams, things like that, versus all our buddies in the ops and engineering worlds.
Yeah. So there's a question there about how long does it, or what are the steps needed for implementation? Do you want me just to quickly address that one, Sarah? Do that one?
Yeah, go for it, Jason.
Okay, I'm just going to show my screen. Really so this is my experience over the last 15, 16 years. The steps we do is these 7 steps at the top here. It's really discovery, proof of concept. And the beauty about when you're using Sharp Cloud, and I've used other tools, like I'm in the Microsoft Dynamics, etc. But when I've been using with a Sharp Cloud platform, we're able to get to a very simple, like a single story, by finding the problem, where's the value, looking at the strategy objectives, and then actually doing a very quick model using Sharp Cloud. So you actually can see, I can see this works. We then move that on to a proof of value where we go a lot more detailed and come up with a minimal viable product. And once we've done that, we usually launch that, and then we continue with a much more detailed analysis, design, developing, whereby the minimal viable product is then really embellished and deployed. And this then moves on through the supporting, is because what happens is we might start with a simple prioritization, but what will happen, and it never fails, now that we know
we're over
this,
time, Jason.
we can
Sorry
do
to
that.
cut you short.
Okay.
I think we're over
Sorry.
time, aren't we? Jenny, are we at time now?
We are at time. We
can take more questions if people want to
so that's
offline.
impressive. But we can certainly circle back with anybody who has submitted a question that we have not yet addressed. We'll catch you via email. We do appreciate your attendance today. Thank you to our presenters. If there's a need for a follow-on, it's not out of the question. If there's a lot of demand for this topic, we are happy to bring more information back to you at a later date. Thank you all for tuning in. We know your time is important. We appreciate it. And we will see you soon. Have a great
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Stay safe.